Podcast napędza biuro tłumaczeń Duna. Przetłumacze. Podcast o tłumaczach, tłumaczeniach i językach. Kiedy w USA 17 kwietnia 2011 roku, a w Polsce dzień później, miała miejsce premiera serialu Gra o Tron, świat dosłownie oszalał na punkcie tej sagi. Owszem, w kręgach miłośników fantastyki książki cieszyły się sporą popularnością, ale zrealizowana z ogromnym rozmachem telewizyjna produkcja przyciągnęła fanów ze wszystkich kręgów zainteresowań. 8 lat i 7 sezonów później przygoda zakończyła się, a fanom pozostało oczekiwanie na zakończenie książkowej wersji, które autor George R.R. Martin obiecuje od lat. Na otarcie łez my mamy dla Was coś wyjątkowego. Rozmawiamy z Davidem J. Petersonem, który na potrzeby serialu stworzył język plemienia Dothraki. Oprócz tego opracował od podstaw wiele innych języków na potrzeby filmów i seriali. Całą rozmowę prezentujemy w oryginale, po angielsku. Nazywam się Błażej Grygiel i zapraszam Was na kolejny odcinek podcastu Przetłumacze.
My name is David Peterson, and I'm a professional language creator. I've worked on projects like Game of Thrones, The 100, and lately The Witcher.
Yes, I have seen the list of movies, of television series, of even video games that you collaborated.
That's right, yeah.
It's a really, really big list. These are the most well-known titles from recent 10 years. You must be a very busy man.
Yeah, pretty busy. I definitely am keeping busy. I usually have 3 or 4 or 5 projects going at a time. It is a byproduct of how the industry works. It's not necessarily the best thing. It would be better if there were more language creators that had more opportunities. And I've been trying my best to help that happen, but it's a slow process. I'd like to think things are better now than they were, 10 years ago, but it's still a work in progress.
Aren't you a little bit, sometimes of course, confused because working on 2 different projects at the same time, I would get confused with the languages, and you are the creator. You do not mix one created language with the other?
Generally not, no. And that also goes for studying languages, at least as I found. It's not like I really mix up words or anything with one language or another. They each have their own special spot in my brain. Sometimes, though, I will misremember the experience of having created something. In other words, I'll go to in a particular language. I'm looking for a word for run, and I discover it's not there, but I feel like it should be. And it's because what I remember is having created a word meaning run in some other language. So that will happen sometimes, but otherwise, like actually mixing up words or grammar, that doesn't really happen. I'm not sure why. It would seem like, or I wouldn't be surprised if I did, but it doesn't seem to happen.
That's fascinating. How do you even begin to create a language on its own? How do you begin your work, your creating such a job as a professional language creator? When did it all begin and how?
The way I started was I started when I was at the university at UC Berkeley in 1999. I began studying many languages, as many as I could, and then I was told that I might enjoy linguistics by my mother, which I'd never heard of linguistics before, the scientific study of language. And so I took a linguistics class, and indeed I enjoyed it very much. And somewhere in the middle of that linguistics class, I came up with the idea of creating my own language to do things that I enjoyed seeing in languages. And then I've been doing it ever since.
So when you start a project, for example, for a TV show or for a movie, what are your first steps? Do you think about the melody of the language or, I don't know, its root sound or root grammar? How is a language being born?
It depends if I'm doing it for myself or if I'm doing it for somebody else. If I'm doing it for somebody else, for example, a TV show or something, I usually do have to start with the sound because that's really the only part they care about. They care about how it sounds to them, and they don't, all the rest is just details. So I have to, usually the first thing I do is I create a sound system, and then I create some fake sentences using that sound system. In other words, fake words and a fake sentence pattern, and none of it has any meaning. And I share that with the producers to see if I have achieved the sound that they're after. If I haven't, I go back and tweak it until it's right. And if I have, then I actually move on to creating a language. Because at that point, usually their involvement ends, or at least for a time. So once you have the sound system set, you can begin with the grammar. I like beginning with nouns because they tend to be simpler. But after a while, you have to move on to verbs to make sure that things, the system that you have in place is actually going to work. And then you move on from there bit by bit, kind of deciding pieces of grammar as you go, and testing them out and making sure that they actually work and that they actually sound right, that things aren't getting too jumbled. Anyway, so, just takes a long time, and you go bit by bit, step by step. Pretty soon you have a full language.
It really sounds fascinating that you start from the sound and then go to the detail, to the detailed grammar and detailed vocabulary. Do you create the vocabulary specifically to the needs of the project, of the movie, or sometimes you do it wider and you do the vocabulary in terms, maybe the fans would like to speak in that language on a daily basis, for example?
I always aim to create as much vocabulary as I possibly can, and I don't ever view any of these projects as concluded, so I keep working on them. Whether the shows or movies associated with them are still running or not, doesn't matter. I certainly have to account for everything that I need to translate in the script, but no, I've never felt the need to only create that vocabulary. I usually just create whatever I feel like it. Even if it's a word that probably isn't ever going to be used on the show, you just keep going because it's fun.
It sounds as though it's really fun for you. And do you use the existing languages as a base for your projects? And if so, for what projects?
Only if the project calls for it. If not, it's not appropriate. It's basically plagiarism. Mm-hmm. But there are times when it is not only appropriate, but is required. So, for example, in The 100, I created a future version of the English language. And so it would be very silly to just make stuff up. It wouldn't make any sense. Every single part of it has to be based on the English language. I did a similar thing with a show called Into the Badlands for AMC, where the language I created was a futuristic version of Spanish. So there again, for both of those languages, if you ask, well, what were their sources? Their sources were English and Spanish and no others. But if it's a language like Dothraki or something like that, English and Spanish don't exist in that world. Indeed, none of the languages that we have on this planet exist in that world, so it wouldn't be appropriate to use them in any way. It wouldn't make any sense.
And do you get any contact from fans who would like to know more or try to speak such a language to widen their knowledge? I know that there's a big fan base of languages, for example, from Star Trek series, but do you experience such a fan base?
The biggest fan base that I have for any of my languages is the language that I created for The 100, Trigetta slang. Aside from that, none of them have fan bases that are anywhere comparable to Klingon or even Navi from Avatar. Like there are no conventions or anything like that. I'm sure there are millions probably of people that have tried to learn a little bit of Dothraki or High Valyrian. But that's different from actually getting, like 100 or 200 people that have actually learned the language to fluency and get together and speak it with one another. That type of thing has not really happened for my language outside of my languages outside of Trigeta slang. And even Trigeta slang does not have the kind of fan base that you see with something like Klingon or Navi.
Not yet, we can say. The night is still young.
Sure. Sure.
And do you consider any of your linguistic children your favorite ones? One of those languages seems to be the most, I don't know, valued for you, the project that you find the most, I don't know, maybe interesting, maybe the most surprising for you in the field of work?
I think my favorite one that I created that I would be interested in expanding and maybe learning to fluency and then using is a language called Erathiant that I created for a show called Defiance on Sci-Fi. That was a really wonderful language. It was very difficult for me to use because of the grammar I created, but I mean, it was still a lot of fun. And I think especially if you're really able to learn that auxiliary system, it should be manageable. But it would require some study, and that's not something that I do or have time for, or even the resources for, to study my own languages to fluency, at least the way that I prefer to study. I prefer to study with a native speaker and to learn that way. And that's just not something that can happen with my languages. I don't study as well when it's from a book. I learn, and I study many languages that way. So, I learn about them and I learn their grammatical quirks and everything. But, I mean, in terms of using them, it's just not possible. I mean, like, you can't look at the word for thank you in Polish and get to dziękuję. It's just not going to happen if you haven't heard the language, A lot of it, I think, and sometimes it is writing system. It looks more intimidating than it is. But the thing is, when you hear it, it's different. It hits you different. You have a different experience with it, and it feels different. And you feel so much more comfortable being able to use it once you've heard it. And, it doesn't really happen with my languages, for me anyway.
Now it's time for maybe a little bit tricky question, because I'm aware of the fact that you may not be allowed to speak about it, but I know that you are working on Dune also. And can you shed a light on this project in terms of your work?
I mean, not much indeed, as you suggest, not much. But I will say that I worked on, more than one, linguistic system on the project. So it wasn't just one language that I did. I did also get to do a writing system. But, beyond that, I can't say what I translated or for whom or anything like that. The movie, I mean, fingers crossed, should still be coming out. If
yeah, if
it didn't, it seemed very reasonable back in April to say, oh yeah, the movie's scheduled to come out in December, no problems. Now I don't know. I certainly hope so.
Of course, our fingers are also crossed. Okay, so let's go to your books, because you are not only a person who creates languages, but you also enforce other people to widen their horizons, to widen their knowledge. You've written The Art of Language Invention. Sadly, the book is not translated to Polish language yet. Maybe in time it will be. So tell me, would you like to see more language creators around the world? Do you think it is a profession that can be, I don't know, bigger in numbers?
Yeah, but by the way, first, I want to say I don't have any control over what the book is translated into. I'd love to see it translated into Polish. It's been translated into one language, Russian.
Oh.
I have no idea. I have no idea why. But I mean, Russian's a little bit closer to Polish, but of course you have to read Cyrillic. But I don't know if you happen to have Polish listeners that can read Russian, it's there. But yeah, I would. I mean, in terms of other language creators, I've found creating languages to be very fulfilling. And so if there are others that could find the same enjoyment, then I would love for them to do it. And the whole point of the book was to kind of help out so that at the beginning it can seem a little daunting, so that it seems a little less daunting. I think that there is enough room for many more language creators, especially if you look beyond television and film, and if you look to fiction. There are a handful of science fiction and fantasy titles that come out as movies or films every year. And that can support a very small number of language creators, unless everybody's just getting one project and has other means of employment. But there are millions of fantasy and sci-fi books that come out every year. I mean, in like, not just in English, but like in every language all over the planet. Science fiction and fantasy has had kind of a coming of age moment to that. Like, there are, thousands and thousands of books that could have created languages in them. And it also so happens there are thousands of language creators. And so I think it would be nice if those two communities could get together. One of the key problems I've discovered in both with books and with television shows and movies is that not every possible project happens. And it's not because of a negotiation failure or anything like that. It's because there is a project. It could benefit by a created language, but the people in charge either don't know about it, don't think about it, or think about it and decide not to do it. So that means, let's say there's 50 new shows that come out that could have had created languages. Maybe 10 do, maybe less. And so it would be nice if every show that could have a created language did. And this is the same thing for books. So somehow I would like to bridge that gap to encourage more creators to simply have those jobs available. Because right now there's certainly not enough demand, but I think there should be. I think there should be, and there could be. And so I think that the opportunities are out there. We just need to let people know to do it.
Not only do you work with fictional languages, you have co-founded a language creation society. You learned Esperanto. What do you think about creating new languages and the idea of an international language, the interlingua? Would it be possible for such a language to function? Because when the internet spread out through the world, many people thought that this would be the time when English language would rule the world. In fact, the wider the internet gets, the bigger gets the demand for localization. and people still love to read and speak in their own languages. There is a lot of work for all kinds of translators and localization services. So what do you think about the idea of Esperanto and other international languages? Would it be possible for such a language to be alive at that times today?
In my city, we have people that attack and insult other people that wear masks, despite the fact that in the United States, we are number one in cases of COVID-19 and number one in cases of COVID deaths. So I don't think that there's any possible language that you could create and get a whole bunch of speakers. I think it's completely impossible. And it basically lives in the realms of science fiction. And it has nothing to do with the language. It has nothing to do with how well constructed it is, or how old it is, or how popular it is, or how easy to use it is. It has to do with human beings. They're just not going to do it. So I don't think that's possible, no. But I also don't think that, A, that is a problem, or B, that means that nobody should try. And I want to qualify that last remark. So I do think it's foolhardy to create a language at this point and suggest that everybody on the world will speak it. But I don't think that's a goal that language creators should bother with, and that smaller goals may be more rewarding. I look at especially created language communities, I look at them as fandoms. And I think it makes more sense to interact with and discuss them as fandoms. So right now, for example, if instead of looking at Esperanto as the universal language that not enough people use, instead just say that it is a fan group, and the thing that these people are fans of is the Esperanto language. And so they speak it. And not only do they speak it with others. They speak it with their own family. They speak it with friends. And as a result, that is very successful. I mean, that is a success. It doesn't matter if millions of people don't speak it. There are a million, maybe a little less, that do speak it. And that's fantastic. I think that part of using a language, there's simply a joy to it. It feels good to be able to take a language that you have chosen and use it and be able to talk with others and understand them, whether that's a natural language or whether it's a created one. And so I think it's kind of a cool thing for people to create new languages with the intent that they be spoken, but with a smaller aim, without having to worry about the bother of international communication. Because further, and this gets back to my first point, I don't think that it's going to be an issue for long. And specifically, this is why. I absolutely agree with what you've said and have recognized it as well, that as the internet has expanded, rather than everybody adopting English, they discovered that there's pretty cool people they can talk to in their own language, and they can have their own space on the internet that is in their own language. And I think that's fantastic. I think that eventually what is going to happen is that translation software and auditory software is going to catch up to such a degree that, I mean, consider AirPods, that you will be able to kind of just go to a different country, your AirPods or whatever will be able to hear what somebody says to you and translate it into your own ears. Maybe not perfectly, but good enough. And so that I think that the result of that is that it's going to push even further in the direction of people using their own languages rather than adopting something like English, because you won't have to. Instead, people will only learn the languages that they want to. Or, if there's a strong, they're always traveling between one country or another, maybe for business, it'll be more practical to simply learn the language. Or maybe, using darn translation software, maybe eventually they'll just pick it up. And frankly, that's a future I look forward to. I would love to see more people learning languages because they want to, because they think it's interesting, rather than feeling like, well, I'm learning this language because somebody told me to, because it was a requirement. Or asking questions like, you're learning that language, why? What's the point? What's the use? If we get to a point where you don't even have to worry about the functionality of language anymore, language is going to exist purely as an expression of art and culture and personal preference. And I think that's a future I want to be a part of.
I would also love to be a part of such a future, and I wish you and I wish myself that we are going to see that and take part in it. Thank you very much for your time and for the interview.
No problem. Thank you.